Welcome back, and don't go outside. It's really scary out there. We heard in the first session from Paola about one of her exhibitions or one of her explorations of the future of addressing meat. Our next guest, Mark Foster Gage, might be able to tell us something about that and the work that he's done for Lady Gaga. Meat as a dress, in fact, is the idea there. Our next two presentations, architect Mark Foster Gage and student Matt Shaw.
I can keep talking? Okay. They turned it off on purpose. The architect got up. First of all, thank you for having me here. This is it can't be said enough, this is a really great program to put students in dialogue with people from, so to speak, the real world. I actually only met Matt, who's my counterpoint here, a couple of weeks ago via email, and I've already had him up to Yale to be on one of my reviews for my graduate students, and he was really great, even though I don't think he's in the room yet. But if he doesn't totally screw up his presentation in 20 minutes, you should totally graduate him. He did really well. That is, if he shows up. The title of my talk is Architecture After Concepts, and I need to mention I had a little bit of difficulty getting the images here last night. I'm exclusively PC-based, so this is actually an interactive presentation. The images are stretched ever so slightly, so if you put your hands on your temples and squish your head a little bit, that'll take them back to normal size. But if they're a little bit off, just ignore that fact. The convergence of computation, software development, robotic fabrication, advances in material technologies, and the interconnecting capacities of the computer have produced in architecture the need for a new genre of architectural practitioner. Hi, Matt. Glad you could join us. This genre of architect is a combination of researcher, practitioner, frequently with university affiliations that make some forms of research possible. Unlike other disciplines where R&D is done in well-funded laboratories with the hope of patents and payoffs, architecture's R&D is now being done by a new generation of ambitious architectural innovators, largely independently, certainly underfunded, in a pixelated cloud of global experimental practices being revolutionized by their output, requiring all architects and educators to reconsider what practice means for the near future. This, of course, has a significant impact on design criticism. The intersection of this type of experimental and research-based practice with the technical, historical, and theoretical writing that situates these developments is the water in which I swim, so to speak. This shifting technical and material ground of the last 2 decades that I mentioned requires a theoretical basis capable of situating the explosive new vocabularies of forms, materials, colors, graphics, and methods of architectural making and communicating that constitute the architectural terrain of the 21st century. My own writing flows between these worlds of high technology and theory, most recently in these publications ranging from work on composite technologies and software to affect and aesthetic theory. The title of this lecture, Architecture After Concepts, emerges from these theoretical positions and anticipates a new understanding of architecture, and particularly architectural theory, where architecture is not valued for its conceptual content, but for its physical, sensory, and cultural effects. In other words, as a thing in the world. That is to say, I'm more interested in the presence of a thing than the process through which a thing is made or justified. In short, I believe that the world now has tools other than architecture that are better at communicating information, whether through symbols, signs, or indexes. Architecture can accordingly be relieved of its historic duty to communicate symbolic content. We no longer need to judge architecture by its story or what it refers to. A transit center in downtown Manhattan, for instance, can be valued for being a piece of architecture or a transit center, and no longer does not have a requirement to be called a bird. A museum in Denver, Colorado can exist as a museum for its architectural qualities and not be validated by being called an extension of the Rocky Mountains. We are now, in short, free to explore more ineffable territories of sensation, emotion, and affect in architecture. Affect theory is a theoretical position that is fundamentally precognitive response to stimulus. And being based on sensations rather than concepts, affect theory requires a body in actual space, subject to sensations and responsive to environments. Sarah Ahmed of the University of London writes of affect that it is how we are touched by what we are near. This is of particular importance for a new generation of architects primarily interested in form and sensations as opposed to concepts, because computation has, for architecture, allowed for this explosion of new formal vocabularies and sensory effects to be made available, touchable, seeable, and able to be experienced in actual space. So in a world of affect, and for the sake of this talk, the question at hand is, what is the world of the referent in architecture in a world where affect is a new and totally acceptable theoretical terrain for architects to engage in a new form of research? I think that there's, in a sense, three positions that are being articulated in architecture right now. One is that architecture returns to the language of the literal, not metaphorical. And by literal, I mean familiar signs, because people still respond to them. A second option is that architecture relinquishes its relationship with cognition entirely and is no longer about the intellectualization of content, but is instead about precognitive and sensory effects, as I've mentioned. And the third option is, I think, some freakish and compelling combination of the two. This is important for architecture, perhaps more so than it is in other disciplines. If you make a telephone in industrial design that's shaped like a banana, there's very little consequences for it because it can be thrown away. If you make an architecture that is shaped like a banana, you're requiring hundreds of millions of people to look at it and gauge it over its lifetime. And it is a permanent record of a collective intelligence of a community in what they decided to put forward. I think it's a more significant proposition, and I think that's why the problem of literal signs and literal symbols has always been rather controversial in architecture. Not all, but some of my projects in my office have begun to flirt with this third option, where literal symbolic content is included, but absorbed into a larger ambition of effects. A symbol may be visible, but unlike Venturi's duck, where it overwhelms with its obviousness, I'm more interested in the use of the literal as an affect, where it merely tickles the mind with flickers of recognition, and therefore becomes more sensory, as in the case of a tickle, than intellectualized, where the reading of architecture is as a particular sign, as in the Venturi case. There's a few groupings. I'm going to show rather a large number of projects in very short succession. You can think of this as a kind of visual essay. For those of you used to watching architectural presentations, which tend to be a little bit pedantic and jargony, this might hurt. But the question is really how one uses reference in architecture. And I think there's an unconventional, there's a more casual use of reference in architecture. For example, in this project, which was the result of a conversation I had with Chris Bangle, who is the head of design for BMW, which is about importing automotive genetics into automotive design processes. That doesn't mean that the building at the end of the day looks like a car. There's not a literal reference. Instead, there's an importing of affect or an importing of an automotive sensibility into a language of architecture. We do that sometimes historically in my office, in this case for a parametric wall that was designed to deal with lateral loading in much the same way as Thomas Jefferson's serpentine wall, which was of course a precedent. There's of course no literal relationship here between the two, and you'd be hard-pressed to be able to extract the former from the latter. Instead, again, it's the appropriation of a kind of aesthetic sensibility from different disciplines. In this case, which was our competition entry for the PS1 competition for MoMA, which we didn't win, our ambition was to produce an underwater and aqueous environment, and we did that not by producing literal kelp and figures of waves, but adopting qualities of luminosity, reflecting, shimmer, glow, and other things that you find in kind of an aqueous underwater world. These are some of the images that show those qualities, again, without being literal about them, being interpretive about the effects that they produce. This project was also pivotal in, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago we did this project, in trying to propose a way for architecture to relate to culture that doesn't rely on a description of process. So when we presented this project to the board at MoMA, we did so through a video, which made very casual pop references to movie culture. So it wasn't about the process through which this thing was fabricated. It was making a case about how it was absorbed in culture. And this video I'm going to show you was done 7 years ago, so it's rather small, and it was designed for YouTube. It was our first foray into social media as an architectural tool. So it's a little bit low res, but I think you'll get the general gist if I can get it to play here. It also broke nearly every copyright in the books, I'm sure. Okay, so that gives you the general gist. The second body of projects is what I refer to as referential flickering, and that's absorbing a recognizable literal sign into a larger ecology of effects. And I think that's probably why Matt invited me to talk here, is because it's related to his theme of avant pop and new literalism, which we'll hear about in a moment. The first series of projects were done for Nicola Formichetti, who at the time was Lady Gaga's creative director, and thrust my office into the world of kind of cartoon animals and funky online presences. Nicola's sign is the panda bear, and Lady Gaga's is the mermaid here, which you see. These are all Lady Gaga kind of cartoon characters. And so we were asked to do a series of stores. These were 4 stores in Hong Kong and 1 in Beijing, based on this kind of logic of these cartoon characters. So what we did was we sculpted the characters, made them into vacuum-formed panels, kind of arrayed them on a series of walls, worked with the company, the lighting company that did the Batman movies, connected them to computer controllers, and produced a series of orchestrated lighting effects that allow one to read both the individual figure of the panda, but in a sense it functions much like background radiation. It's recognizable if you look for it, but it's not what I would call like a Venturi, clobber you over the head attitude about literal signage in architecture. These are just some of the images with the lighting effects before all of the projects. These stores housed all of a large collection of Lady Gaga's outfits. This shows some of the color changes. This is the all of the LEDs, which were embedded in this wall, which had a mirror in between the vacuum forming, which was the, in a sense, effect wall that generated the coloration and pulsing. And then this is it with all of Lady Gaga's accoutrements. We did a separate one in Beijing, where we took the same molds of the pandas and stamped them in chrome plated plastic. And this one was more about reflection and the kind of reconfiguration of reflection. But these are some of the imageries that go along with that. And then the third one, which hasn't been built yet, is in going to Brazil. This one, we're actually making large panda sculptures. My office is becoming expert at sculpting large balloon pandas. If any of you have a need, a pressing need, I'm your man. So we're going to projection map on these, and we're going to projection map these parametric patterns which we came up with, which are going to allow the figures to dissolve and reappear against this rather charged backdrop. All of this floor, talking about sensation and sensory experiences, we're working with a flooring company, a wallpaper company in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And these are all actually scratch and sniff flooring. So when you walk on this area, it's going to smell like butterscotch. And this is going to smell like eucalyptus. These are my office voted, these are the best scents. Paula's cringing. Yeah. Yeah, I know. The eucalyptus next to butterscotch is kind of a stretch, but we're working on it. Not a lot of precedents to help us out. These are some of the other sculptures we're doing for different sized rooms. You can see the size of a person's here, so these are rather large. So we're actually taking things like Michelangelo's Pietà and doing the Lady Gaga mermaid resting over Nicola's lap. This is my take at a Bernini. I can't remember which one. Again, Lady Gaga, Nicola. And then we're starting to fuse them into what we're calling grottos, where we use symbolic content in these little amoebas, these little panda amoebas. We've designed this entire language of figures with Nicola, and they're forming an environment. This is about 20 feet tall. But I think it's interesting at a theoretical level because it's dissolving in between being a texture, which is unrecognizable in its literal references, and being super literal and super referential in the ability to see certain faces. So again, it's like flickering in and out of these worlds, hopefully. We've done some other projects which had tried to do this, some earlier ones. This is the first public art project for Times Square, which we had done a number of years ago, where Times Square asked us to do a Christmas tree to compete with Rockefeller Center, and they gave us a budget of $10,000. And they didn't even raise that in time, so we actually just took the Christmas trees, I turned them upside down and I turned them pink, and I said, you guys should do a heart. And ever since, it's been this competition in Times Square for this heart. But the idea was that we packed it with about $100,000 worth of donated computer-controlled LEDs, which allowed us to change the configuration and lighting. So sometimes it dissolved from reading it literally as a heart to being a machine to produce an ecology of lighting effects. We've done other projects that involve floral references. This one's for our solar pods project, which is a series of 20-foot tall pods which crack open to reveal new and advanced solar technology as an exhibition device. Solar technology doesn't really have a lot of sex appeal, so we tried to give it some. I don't know if it works for you, but we have a man and a woman for whatever you're into these days. And then these, in a sense, crack open, like I said. And so the motion is evocative of flowers, but it's not the literal modeling of, say, a tulip. And that's something you'll see in another project down the road. The project for Lady Gaga was mentioned. This one's kind of a ontological Gordian knot when you talk about references, but we had modeled her face in multiple different configurations and then 3D printed her face. So we still to this day have hundreds of Lady Gaga faces floating around my office. Again, can be had for a very inexpensive price. I don't know what else we're going to do with them. But we chose the right ones and then made an outfit with Nicola Formichetti, where these were plastered to different parts of her body. So there's a strange doubling where you see the symbol or the sign directly adjacent to the thing which it's signifying. And in the human body, this produces a sense of mutation or a kind of grotesqueness. And that asymmetry we reversed when we were doing things like her drapery, which we digitally made symmetrical. So there's, again, this doubling and this kind of perversion of the things which you would normally take for granted. We've done a number of these projects with a company called Two Hustlers, again, involving Nicola Formichetti for diesel. And one of the initial set of instructions we got were to use a palette that was kind of rusty and concrete-like and apocalyptic, which in itself is a sign, in itself is a symbol of a kind of apocalyptic ambition. And we channeled that through a couple of research projects in our office. One is we're teaching our computers to knit digitally. So these are some of the digital knitting devices. We knitted a form of structure for this project. These are all individual joints which accept Core 10 steel rods, which you would buy from, say, Home Depot. So the joints are entirely custom, 3D selectively laser sintered, and then the structure is just off the shelf. And what that produced, here's just a different pattern, was a type of test environment where all of these squares are TV screens, and we were working at having a foreground and a background, where the foreground is this architectural language and the background is this digital content. And we're playing on the differences on how these two things can refer to one another. So the background content can shift immediately to become a series of advertisements when you're in this store. This is a small pop-up store, which is currently being proposed to go around the world. This is a social media interaction form where you go up to the screens and you can touch and interact with different people around the world. It can be configured to be more environmental, in this case a kind of apocalyptic Times Square environment. This one is the My Pretty Pony environment, which is again to produce a sense of, I don't know, just destabilized irony, I guess one would call it. And then there were many more, going from space to a kind of graffiti courtyard, which was more sympathetic with the architectural language, to an enchanted winter forest with a nice diesel ad at the end. And then the other type of project I mentioned early on was the pure sensory effects, things which don't have a referent, which aren't conceptual, which are only intended to be felt or seen or experienced in some way at a very base sensory level. So a lot of that work happens in things we do, like apartment projects in and around the city. For instance, this project was a penthouse downtown, and we did a 40-foot long folded metal chrome-plated stair that was water jet cut with this pattern, which is intended to dissolve the reading of the stair, and it becomes more of a lighting device. We're very interested in tactility. This is a long, 30-foot long Korean cantilevered kitchen island, which we developed a script for and CNC milled this pattern in. So it's a very tactile environment. You can't help but walk by it and kind of caress your countertop. It's also very good for holding vegetables when you lay them down. They don't roll anywhere. We even use CNC milled flooring in some of the rooms, so especially when you're wearing socks, it's like you get a little massage walking around your apartment. Actually feels really great. And then we did some of these types of projects for Intel. We did a series of 6 installations globally in Asia, the Americas, and Europe. This one that I'm going to show you, this was all of them pushed together, and the idea was that you walk under this and engage with these computers, and you're surrounded by these interactive lighting effects, which pulse and change and glow in a sort of light cocoon around you. This is just a diagram of how the computers were hooked up to a series of color controllable LEDs. And these are the types of effects we're interested in producing. These are still up, so I don't have final photographs of them, but this just shows the general scale. This is the one in Singapore. It's all designed to flat pack and ship. This is just an iPhone photo. It's actually pretty luminous. This looks a little dark. And then there are other ones in different locations around the world again, where you interact with the computer, and again, the lighting effects change and glow based on your proximity and how you're interacting with the computer. And the last project I'm going to show is the New York store that we had done for Nicola, again, to show off Lady Gaga's outfits. And this one was intended to be a pure optical device, where we used a system of facets and a system of mirrors to kind of dismantle the reading between referent and architecture. And it's almost impossible to see anything in the space, so it's almost referent proof, or in a sense, fashion proof. These are some of the renderings, a little bit of the diagrams on how it was assembled. This shows how it operates, where if someone stands in a particular privileged position, the color of what they're wearing reflects in a very focused way. And when that person isn't there, you get no reflections of color. We did physical models, which were absolutely no use whatsoever, because they were very difficult to look at and see. We collaborated with 4 lighting companies globally and did all sorts of different lighting and reflective effects to showcase, again, Lady Gaga's outfits and Nicola's designs. This one is using the ceiling as a device. And this is it with a flash that really flattens everything out. It's almost like a form of visual camouflage. And let's see, hold on. And there's 2 videos I wanted to show. One is of this, and again shows this in space, and the other, if it's loaded, I'm not sure if it is or not, but we'll try it. So this is a video that shows the after effects of this project. Again, not focusing on the process, but how it enters culture. So we've been working with documentary filmmakers on a number of our projects. This one, KK Sanders.
I'm gonna marry the night. I won't give up on my life. I'm a warrior queen, live passionately tonight. I'm gonna marry the dark, gonna make love to the stars.
Everybody's calm, but they're asking, a lot of questions of whoever is Lady Gaga, which is just a name to me. The line is called you because everybody wants to see the fashion, and people want to see this fella named Rico, the fella with the tattoo. Everybody wants to see him.
Some leather and cruise down the street that I love, and my fishnet gloves, I'm a sinner. Then I'll go down to the bar, but I won't cry anymore. I'll hold my whiskey up high, kiss the bartender twice, I'm a loser. I'm gonna marry the night. I'm gonna marry the night.
And the last one was a collaboration, if it's loaded, between an architect. It was for the launch of Lady Gaga's You and I video. It was done with a fashion designer and a botanist and a DJ and a documentary filmmaker. And who am I missing? But it's kind of interdisciplinary project taken to its logical extreme and is intended to produce the affect of happiness, which is what I'll leave you with.
Heidi, Heidi, deine Welt sind die Berge. Heidi, Heidi, denn hier oben bist du zu Haus. Dunkle Tannen, grüne Wiesen im Sonnenschein. Heidi, Heidi, brauchst du zum Glücklichsein.
Thank you.